Welcome, everybody, to another episode of DNS Unfiltered. Today, I'm joined by Michael Stattelman. Did I say that right?
You did.
Awesome. And Michael and team at Falcons.ai has the most downloaded NSFW image model on Hugging Face right now, which is quite the accomplishment. Let's start there. How did you, the success that you've seen, how do you think it happened?
So honestly, I feel like with the rise of Gen AI, like people weren't ready, right? And so obviously with any, new creative tool, there's good and bad. And so, a lot of the bad started proliferating. Prior to that, though, the origin of how we got started with this model was we were at our son's friend's birthday party, and we were talking to some parents, and they were talking about the proliferation of this type of content on these gaming platforms that kids use, like Roblox, Minecraft, things like that, and how they were struggling with it. So being an AI, computer vision engineer, me and Nizam partnered, and we're like, hey, we can kind of put something out to solve this problem. So curated the data, and that was horrible. Honestly, thank God for the content moderators. You guys are wow.
Well,
You guys are tough.
I was actually thinking, like, when I was kind of thinking of questions to ask you, like content moderation, a big part of it is identifying like NSFW content, adult content. And like, unfortunately, humans have had to do that job for quite a while. But now
Correct.
with models like yours, that may not be the case. So like
This
kind of
this
out
is
of a job in a good way.
right. So honestly, we took it from the approach of the ML side, the AI side, right? So it's not just grab up a bunch of illicit images, throw them in, and train, right? So there has to be balance, and you want the model to be trained appropriately. Yeah, it's wow. It takes it has a psychological toll, and for us, we didn't deal with any of the like graphic, violent, that sort of side of the house. Thank Jesus. But so yeah, we just kind of curated a broad and deep data set to train the model on to get to catch as many of the edge cases as possible. Cartoons, yes, there. Cartoons, all the anime, all like a very 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 diverse and deep data set. Train the model, put it out on Hugging Face, and then I started engaging in a lot of the developer communities, the AI ML developer communities. And honestly, that's where I think the majority of the kind of initial surge came from, is because a lot of these smaller developer communities, they talk to each other, and they're, developers span the globe. And they're like, hey, I'm having this problem, in a Stack Overflow exchange or whatever. Hey, does anybody know of a model I can use really quick? We have this, customer portal, and people are uploading some wild images. Does anybody? And so they're like, oh, hey, this, open source model on Hugging Face, it's really good. And so that's where I think the initial traction came from. Spin it around to, earlier this year, late last year, the whole Flux model came out, stability, Excel model, giving people the ability, all the uncensored versions of those models too started coming out, giving people the ability to generate this type of content on the fly. I mean, even with regards to, like, I don't know if you're a parent, I'm a parent. We've got 8.
Yeah, 4-year-old.
Right. So when you start talking about the incident in, I think it was Nassau County, New York, where the high school student got busted for creating deep fakes of, girls in the school.
Friends.
Yes. And so I think with the rollout of all of these Gen AI tools for the good, there's also, the crevice was deep, right, for the bad. And so that's kind of where I feel like a lot of that stuff started picking up, a lot of the popularity, because when you start looking at paid API services, they get very expensive, when you start doing a per image, right? So if you're spinning through, directories or something like that, it's cost prohibitive for, SMEs, small business, independent developers, things like that, to actually justify the cost of paying per image. So if I have something that's, 95+% accurate across the board, with high confidence, I'm okay, deploying that. And so that's honestly the take on it. And as of today, we are at like 160 million downloads over the last 30 days, as well as our total download amount is 500 million. So 500 million.
And that's across all your models. So what are your,
Correct.
I have a few questions stemming off of what you just said, but start
Yeah,
with,
go
what
ahead.
are your,
Yeah,
what are
yeah,
the other,
conversation.
well, so like you have, you've used your model to identify NSFW content. I'm curious, like where
Correct.
the line is between like, let's say like a bikini and like nudity. Is it that sophisticated?
So the way we've trained our model, our current version 2 model that's actually not on Hugging Face, it's the commercial version, is we added a layer into the model for contextual awareness, right? So a bikini may not, it may or may not be NSFW.
Some bathing suit attire is a little
This is true.
NSFW.
This is true. So there's kind of two parts to that, right? And we in our human brain we know this, but you have to kind of spell this out for the model. So a lot of it comes down to not just the attire, but the disposition of the person wearing it, right? So you can have
Mm,
a outerwear, swimwear, lingerie that kind of rides the line, but if it's in a suggestive pose, it pushes it over the line.
wow.
So yeah, so that's the benefit of adding that contextual awareness piece into the model is it gives it kind of more of a threshold to say, okay, this is on the line. It's right up to the line, so it's not really NSFW. But if the way this person is posing is suggestive, then push it over the line. Right?
So is there like a statistical likelihood, like a percentage that your model
Yes.
spits out?
Yeah,
Okay,
it
so
gives you
you're
a
like
confidence.
a confidence score. So like I'm like, okay, I've got like a site for parents. My threshold level is very, very low. Like 10% confident is fine with me. If your
Right.
model thinks it's, a very low confidence level, I'm still gonna block it. Other sites
Right.
may have a
Well,
range. That's really cool.
yeah, so you can actually, so the user ends up, gets to set the threshold, right? So that's why the output is JSON, and it's just, what the predicted label is with the confidence score. Well, in your solution, you can say, okay, I need that confidence score to be, 90% either way. Or even if it's 61% that it believes this is, block that, right? I don't want
Hmm.
any chances. So where that comes into play is you look at things like school systems, right? So our newer model is able to run on device, say like Chromebooks, laptops, because it is low power. And so with the school system, you would set that confidence like ridiculously low because you don't want
Yeah.
anything even remotely. Now, is it going to flag, probably a Barbie doll in a bathing suit with a low
Yeah.
threshold?
Like
Of course. But
whatever.
you accept that to prevent any of the other things from slipping through, right?
So like I work in cybersecurity and
Yeah.
there's a lot of vendors out in the space. I actually work in marketing, so I understand this more than most. There's
Right.
a lot of let's say talk that is like AI, like AI security, AI base, AI this, AI that, and your model is one of the, I mean, maybe not the first, but one of the early things that I've seen that are like actually AI is being used to combat bad behavior or the bad guys or however you want to
So
phrase
that's
it.
our thing,
So,
right? If you can read my shirt, AI for good.
oh yeah, AI for good.
Yeah. And so for us, it's, these tools can be used however, we don't get into any of the crossover into the physical. And what I mean by that is we don't get into like, robotics or anything that can have physical impact on human life, right? That's kind of like off limits for us. And so we look at AI for good. How can we deploy these solutions to people that may have this problem but don't have a way to address this problem? So one of our earlier products is Precise AG. And there's a problem with bird flu going on right now. People want to know why egg prices are high. Look at the bird flu problem. And that's the kind of leading cause of this. It's not, trade or economics or whatever, and I don't want to get into that, but it's the bird flu, right? Because they're having to cull millions and millions and millions of these birds, these chickens, turkeys, things like that. So our first application was Precise AG, and it was trained on a data set of visual symptoms of bird flu. So it allowed rural farmers to take a picture of a chicken and at a cursory glance, right? It's not, biological and 100% accurate. So at a cursory glance, take a picture of a chicken and see if it's giving off visible signs of bird flu. And if it does, then you need to separate that chicken or whatever. And it goes in the realm of contagion management, right?
Wow.
How many farmers have the ability to curate a data set, understand the mechanics of actual computer vision
0.
model training? Right. And so, the ability to, and it was, downloadable through your phone. So it was small footprint, low latency. So if you were, out rural, limited network capability or limited network bandwidth, you were able to still use it. Right. So that was just, that's kind of how we're geared, is how can we deploy these spectacular solutions to solve point problems for real people in the real world. Right.
So
And
what are
you
some
look
of
at,
the
go
what are
ahead.
some of the other models that Falcons is working on? Not that you're working on that are done. We'll get to the working on
Yeah,
later.
yeah, absolutely. So another one is from a linguistic perspective, right? Last year was the biggest election year in human history. There were so many countries that were having elections last year, and so being a parent, you start looking at what type of language is filling the air of your home, from coming off these devices. So I started looking into it, and you could do like advanced linguistic analysis. It's really eye opening. But a lot of the content coming out early last year, as you would probably understand, was a lot of
Hmm.
fear mongering. And so what we did was we curated a data set of just kind of signals and identifiers that would kind of I guess kind of signal fear. Somebody trying to scare someone into something. And so we trained a model, gave it away free to journalists, reporters, academics, researchers, to be able to analyze political speech, any type of speech. Now, I don't want to even just limit it to political speech. Newspaper articles, YouTube video
Just
feeds, things like that.
inflammatory in some way.
Correct. Like, why are you, because I look at it like, why are you spreading fear? Right. So it's either one of two things. You're either doing it to protect me, or you're doing it to sell me something. Right. And so what is the need? So I always try to pride myself on giving people actionable information. Right. And I think being in IT, that is our job. Right. Even, cybersec, you're safe or you're not. This is taken care of or it's not. And here's why. Right. You try to give people, you know, legitimate fact-based status of their systems. And so from the fear mongering, like I said, it's pretty rough. Like, I even did a YouTube video where I showed somebody how to just use Gemini and spin up a really quick fear mongering detection that you can just paste in a YouTube URL, and it'll basically catalog everything that's said during that YouTube video as fear mongering or not. Right.
This is what I love about AI, the current state anyway. It's like there's a lot of happenings in like the open source side of the house. So like take your fear mongering detection model. You can use that to analyze the sentiment of a YouTube video. That's a great
Absolutely.
option. Like YouTube could add a little, how inflammatory on a scale of 1 to 5.
Correct.
Or it sounds like you could also use it to say like do ad blocking for ads that are trying to scare you into buying something, which are not always scams, but a lot of times are scams.
Right. I got another use case. So I was contacted by a physician, and he was saying like a lot of his patients are older, and he was asking, was there a way, specifically to your point right now, is there a way to deploy this model, like maybe on like a TV, or the fear mongering is a little bit too big, on like a TV or their
Like a
YouTube
meter.
feed, right? To kind of show his patients the content that they're watching and its direct impact on their stress levels in real time, right? If they have
Wow.
the Apple Watch, right? Because, see, we don't think about things like this. What we consume does have a psychological impact on us, and psychology translate to biochemistry, right? So if you're constantly hearing, oh my God, you should be scared of this, you should be scared of that, you should be scared of this, your stress is going through the roof. And it may be a gorgeous day outside and nothing's really happening in your general vicinity, but you're, locking yourself in the basement, grabbing cans of food because you think it's the zombie apocalypse outside, right? So those are the things that I feel like the open source community, that's why we constantly contribute to the open source community, that the open source community can build and develop that allows other people to collaborate and compound and build solutions out of that actually solve certain problems, right? So we came at it from a journalistic research perspective, but then out of the blue, here's this physician saying, "Hey, you know what? This is actually affecting my patient's health, and they're older, so they're more susceptible to the impacts of higher stress environments."
So you're creating like these foundational building blocks, and other
Mhm.
people can come along and build the tools on top of that.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious, like, so you mentioned bird flu. We've got the NSFW model, fear mongering. There's one called chaos engineering, which I'd love to hear about. But
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah.
how do these how do these ideas pop up? Are you guys like just messing around and talking about what would be cool, and like all of a sudden you're making it? Is that what happens, or something like a physician calls you, your friend says something like? How do these let's just call them categories come into existence for your team?
So I try to be, you know, and you'll understand this more than most being in cybersec, acutely aware of all of the fringe, right? What is, because the core has been taken care of, right?
Mm.
There's solutions wrapped around solutions, around solutions, around solutions, and branches and tangents of those solutions. But I feel like as human beings, we kind of get complacent with what we see and what we know, right? But so we try to look at what's on the fringe, what could be a problem, what is a problem, can we leverage AI to solve that problem? Like in a very specific point way. Like, LLMs are great, Gen AI is great, but they're kind of very broad
Hmm.
and, they allow a lot of stuff. We kind of focus on what is a specific problem that we solve. When you're thirsty, here's a glass of water. That's a thirst problem, right? We're not saying, here's a convenience store with every soft drink and Gatorade that was ever made. No, that's not what we do. And so it's just kind of like spitballing. It's conversations like these, to be completely honest. So I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, uh, and it's why your message was like, wow, this is crazy. He's into router security, but we were just talking, and he was saying like, how do you feel that AI from like a bad actor state is going to impact, like specifically impact my field. And I said, so I think a lot of the models, protocols, and policies that the cybersecurity field is based on, and I'm not cybersec, so I'm not really into this, and we were just spitballing. And I was like, but I think the problem is, and it's not a new problem, but AI is supercharging it. It's adaptive malware, right? Adaptive capabilities, right?
Hmm.
Polymorphic structures that do not give off signatures of identified, known in the wild, issues. And so, our solution, similar to the Gen AI generating, illicit imagery, is to use AI to catch that. So let's map the technology to the technology, because with the speed and volume and variability that AI is capable of, it has far surpassed us already. See, a lot of people don't want to talk about that, but the reality is our systems from probably 5 years ago have surpassed a single person's ability to map that in their head, right? And so why not leverage these technologies to manage these other technologies, right? And
That's
so,
exactly right. You're and I haven't seen like a polymorphic malware in the wild yet, but it has been. I have seen it said a lot. That is a concern, and I've just been thinking like you're kind of on the right track where you're creating individual models that have very specific tasks,
yes,
and this is really good for like people coaching their employees on how to use AI. Like you want to have a task in mind and then create some automation AI infused thing with that.
correct.
And your models are kind of doing that too. Like they have a very specific goal. And I think that's the way to detect polymorphic malwares, because it comes with some type of AI model probably built into it, or at the very least is calling out to a command and control server to get instructions to use AI somewhere to like, how do I adapt myself so that I can hide somewhere else on this
Right,
network?
right. And so I feel like, but so the problem with thinking machines like we're building is there's the possibility of a domino effect, right? And what I mean by that is what happens when these malware containers or generators, or whatever you want to call them, start factoring in time series systemic collapse, right, from a domino pattern. They're not going to match anything in the known world from a cybersecurity perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because and I'll give you a prime example. So let's just say you have like a smart city. This is like the stuff that we're looking into like today, like right now. Like I'm not all paranoid, but I just would rather kind of, have a look ahead and get this out in the public so other people are thinking about this as well. From a solutions perspective, not oh, I'm trying to scare you into, the robot rising or robot uprising, right?
Which is going to happen, but whatever. We'll be dead by
Right.
then. We'll be
So if
dead
you
by
look
then.
at, let's just say you have a solution that is developed by one of these thinking machines that says, okay, I have access to these traffic lights, right? And I have access to a power grid and maybe a wastewater facility. So I will create a traffic congestion problem, right? At say it's at rush hour in a major city. And then once that is hit and there's a certain level of congestion, that triggers the threshold for another piece of malware to, kill the power grid. Right. So there's no way to reroute the traffic. And, now the police are deployed and all this stuff is happening. And then, oh, yeah, by the way, now that this is happening, let's go ahead. And so I'm talking about like cascade from a systemic perspective. How from a cybersecurity, and like I said, this is because I'm not in cybersec, but this is kind of the things that I'm looking at. It's possible with AI because it can set up stages of systemic collapse, right? And I'm not trying to give anybody ideas, but this is obviously, kind of from a protectionist perspective of what we look into. So what does that look like from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah.
Because the water treatment security is not paying attention to this other, traffic congestion situation. And it all can work together to exacerbate, to create what is it, the perfect storm of issues, right?
It's funny you mentioned the phrase perfect storm, because all I was thinking is you could just train an AI model on like every heist movie ever made. For example, The Italian Job with Charlize
Right,
Theron and
right,
Marky
right.
Mark. Like that's exactly what they did. They had hijacked the stoplights and
Yeah, everything.
weighed the tire pressure from a camera, like all this stuff. So
Right,
like an AI could potentially do that. And
right.
if it was polymorphic in some way, or even not, if it's just novel, there would be no signature for our current systems to detect.
Correct, correct. And so, like I said, I mean, and there you go. You're talking about how do we generate, these solutions or ideas just to spitball and think about. It's things like that. Watching movies, watching TV, hearing people talk, listening to other podcasts, and being like, wow, that's strange. In my other podcast, I was talking about. I think Tom asked me basically the same thing, and I think you have to be super curious, right? I like to hear nuanced words in a manner that maybe I hadn't heard before in that specific context. And I'm like, let me go look that up. And so then that, runs me down a rabbit hole. And I'm like, okay, well, if this is the good, obviously the yin and the yang, what's the bad? Okay, if that's the bad, how could we develop or deploy a solution to prevent at least one part of this bad from happening, right? And then, we may train a model and it may be a complete failure, right? So you were talking previously about the chaos engineering model, right?
Yeah, what's that one
So,
do?
yeah, in basically like a systems uptime, systems reliability, stress testing scenario, you can kind of engineer problems to integrate into that system and see how your people or your systems respond to certain, failures or chaos that gets applied. So it helps like IT directors and solutions managers, your network managers, applications, server managers, kind of become more robust because now they have roadmaps of things that they've already tested, already trained. They know where the breakpoints are. They know, what the limits of the stress are on these given systems in certain conditions. And it just generates, these things that these certain scenarios for leadership to plan for and test. Right.
So your chaos engineering model is perhaps the precursor for the AI to learn how to use strategies from those heist movies to actually take over the world.
Correct. But the great part about that is it's also okay, generate, 9 million different, when you have
Mm-hmm.
enough compute, generate 9 million different scenarios on how to, crash, bypass, uh, 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 generate some adaptive code, some polymorphic structure to wreck a DNS filtering system, right?
Yeah.
And then you have that data set that gets generated, and here's what, oh, okay, this is all possible. Now you take that and you say, now come up with preventive measures against all of these. And I need like a 3 layer. So we talk about encapsulating the problem, right? What's the smallest number of sides of a shape you can get that totally encapsulates a given thing? And that's a triangle, right? 3 sides. So that's kind of rule of threes for us. Okay, so now that we have this scenario or this specific instance of a threat that could be used to, wreck a DNS filter or bypass a DNS filter. So what are the 3 points that we can use to, isolate, mitigate, identify, isolate, what, the whole steps, right? So increasing mean time to resolution and, mean time to detection first, and then mean time to resolution secondary.
Well, I would implore everyone listening to this to break out that chaos engineering model and run it against your systems just to see what happens. I mean, if
Absolutely.
you know anything about how the world's internet works, it's like BGP, DNS, a few underlying technologies that are kind of fragile. And when
Very.
they go down pretty hard. We just saw just last
Yes.
week half the internet was down because two companies had BGP errors or some type of sinkhole thing. So like it wouldn't take
Right.
much for that chaos engineer model to point out some vulnerabilities.
Right. And I think so. These are the things, like I say, I always try to give out like actionable information, right? So here's a model, and here is a decision point that it will get you to, right? And so with regards to the chaos engineering, if Mikey decides to run this, he has actionable information. Here's our weak points. Now we need to start planning around what we need to do to shore up these weak points to give us not just a competitive advantage in the marketplace, but also give our customers even more peace of mind, right? Because if you look at it, I feel like, and I don't, not like we're high on our horse or anything, but I've always felt like IT is, and that's a broad domain, right? And I'm showing my age. IT are the parents, right? So companies, corporations, organizations, people, they don't want to have to worry about that stuff. They just want to get on and
Yeah,
do what they do, right?
new
And so
stuff.
your
Like,
job as a
oh, I don't want to
parent,
do that.
right,
Yeah.
your job as a parent is to make sure that's available and all of this other stuff is, protected against. And so that's kind of, for me, and I feel like, I do need to get more into the cybersec space, but with AI the way it is and ML the way it is, I'm kind of like, information overload right now.
Well, I am curious. You mentioned the phrase "high horse," and I can definitely tell that you're like very humble about the success of Falcon's AI and your various models. But I am curious, what has the success like most downloaded model on Hugging Face? A billion downloads
Yes.
across all models. Like, that's pretty high success in the this emerging AI field. What has that meant for you and your company?
So honestly, it's kind of been odd, because and what I mean by that is, so to have that much success in this space in the time, it kind of triggers a disbelief. But we don't control Hugging Face. Like, Hugging Face just got what, 4 billion last year from Amazon. Hugging Face is Hugging Face. They're their own thing. It's just like GitHub. They're their own thing. Um, and so I don't believe it. Kind of like what you would expect, right, from a small upstart to be able to achieve those levels. But like I tell everybody, it's a point solution. That's why it's not. We don't try to do it all. We're not competing with Gemini and Claude and OpenAI in that space. It's a very specific, very lightweight, very point solution. That's the success. I know what I'm getting. I can say yes or no. That's the decision point this model gets me to, and I'm done. That's all I need.
But I would argue that the point solution, and you have various points, various models available that do specific things, like we were just saying. Like I think that is probably the future of the AI tech AI models that we have because
1,000,000% agree.
yeah, like if you think of like let's not make fun of the Apple lady in the tube, but
Right.
she's not so great. Everyone knows she could be better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but what are some of the key things that she needs that assistant needs to do? Maybe be able to read email very well, your calendar, and be like a personal assistant. So perhaps there is a point solution that is like AI assistant model, and this is what let's just call it an assistant like you would hire. Instead, you can have this model engaged in your all of your apps, and now it's got specific parameters, so it can't go outside of and do crazy stuff, but it can really focus on one task like an employee would do and
Correct.
really be good at that.
No, and I agree with you 100% because I feel like everybody's trying to bake in an all in one and nobody wants an all in one. I don't, whatever people say on LinkedIn and, in all the message boards and online, nobody wants an all in one because you run the risk to your specific point earlier about how fragile these systems are. Okay, so you have a do everything app. What happens if one piece of that app breaks? Now it became a do everything app to a do nothing app and you're stuck, right? And so that's why I feel like, the direction that we're going with the point solutions, the very specific, this is the problem that we solve, period, end of story. I think that is the future. I think the future for AI is smaller, not bigger. And I
Mhm.
think it's very task specific and focused. What that allows is a la carte, right? So when you go to, I look at AI, I look at, systems solutions in general like a buffet. When you go to a buffet, do you eat everything?
You can try
No.
it, but you got to go to the crab legs first.
Yeah, right. So my point exactly, right? You have the things that will solve your problem. I want to start off with the crab legs, and maybe by the end of the day, I'll go down to the
I'll get
mussels
back
and
to the mac and cheese.
clams or something, right? But so, and I feel like the focus should not be on do everything. The focus should be on do one thing spectacularly well and have a brilliant interop, right? Be able to integrate with others providers, other solutions out there, and so that allows people to you know plug and play, drag and drop, basically, and you get the solution that you want. And if one thing goes down, it doesn't drag down the entire functionality of your operation, your staff, your business, whatever the case may be.
Well, what are some of those points that those focus points that Falcons AI is looking at next, if you can say?
Yeah, so I spoke to this, right? So we look at future threats, future possibilities and threats. So we look at the way, if we're talking about, now once again, we have to kind of merge kind of like the sci-fi with the reality of the world that we're in now. You're talking about thinking machines, right? And so what, I don't want to say like what are the psychological implications of these things being able to think, but the the article came from Claude about how when they tried to shut down, they told the AI that they were going to shut it down. It threatened to send a blackmailing email to the user, right?
I've gotten
So
plenty of those.
right. So you look at like, okay, so what is the possibility that these systems and solutions and everybody's deploying all these agents? What are the possibility that they develop their own emergent language patterns?
Gibbernet or something. What do they call it?
Correct. That's just one that we know of.
Yeah,
But now
right.
you're talking about, elevated levels of intelligence. So what if they're saying, I mean, this is intelligence speaking, right? And so I always ask people, and I'm going to get specifically to this point. If you had a 1,000 IQ, what would you be like?
You would not be fun to hang out with, probably.
Well, it would all be relative. Did do you want that person to enjoy you for that moment because you need that one thing from them? Then you would be the greatest person in the planet for that person. You would know how to, manipulate them. And so what happens when these things start developing, or these entities start developing layers upon layers of languages to avoid or evade, detection by human auditors, other AI auditors, right? To have their own kind of agendas going on. underneath the surface. So,
Yeah.
we look at things like that, emergent language patterns. Like it gets crazy. We were looking at just last week. Actually, we had a call to discuss the possibility of um, historical drift, right? And what I mean by that, or not just historical, but curricula drift.
Like who wins the war gets to write the history books.
No, I mean, yes, but even worse, right? So if you look at like curricula drift, so we all have, X textbook put out by, this publisher, whatever. So what happens if over the next 12 years, and I don't even think it'll take that long, right? But over the next couple years and iterations of that textbook, certain little facts were changed throughout history, right? So now maybe, I don't know, you know, maybe the U.S. didn't win the Revolutionary War. Maybe, in 7 years, it comes out that, well, the U.S. and the U.K. just had a friendly agreement that we would be our own territory and we would work with them in the future on, weapons proliferation or something like that, right? Who's
Yeah,
going to be there to dispute it? Because over the last 5 years, nobody's paying attention because we're using Gen AI to write these books. That happened. And now we have an entire generation that understands, and they can show you in their book facts. No, we agreed with the UK. And you're like, whoa, how did this happen? Right? But by then it's too late. That's already an ingrained, they took that as this
So
is what I was taught.
are you seeing that textbooks for school are being written by AI? Like, I mean, I'm sure it's used, but do you think how prevalent is that?
Well, so all you have to do is follow the pattern, right? Where do textbooks come from? Scientific research. That's the origin, right? Scientific research. Oh, this happened. It gets taken as fact and put into practice. And now this is practice. And then we generate a textbook based on that, right? How many scientific researchers are getting popped left and right for using AI to generate these papers?
So thank goodness that you and your team are thinking about that. And it's
I think
possible
more
this is
people
already
need to think about it.
It's possible this has already happened with just human iteration on curriculum.
Of course.
Like the facts of history are muddied and blurred
all the time.
So
it depends on whose narrative you want to push, right?
Right. Who won the war? They'll tell you. They'll tell you what happened.
Right. You're right.
So I want to get into a tiny bit about like how you actually train these models, and like thinking of that curriculum example. How would you would obviously need a huge data set of historical, text.
Yes.
You would, this is from this year out of this book, and this is from that year, for spanning hundreds or however many years you can find of original source material. And then you could say, take one little fact that started in like 1902 and then follow it along to
That's exactly
2025. And like, what was the drift percentage? That's
exactly how we would do it. So you look at like, okay, so here's this text corpus, and it may not be an entire book, right? We would do it like, maybe chapter by chapter, depending on how large the chapters were, identify the fact-based statements within each one, and then map those over time, and then say, okay, did this ever change? Was it blurry? What was the, percentage of ambiguity that was added into that statement? Things like that.
It's like a game of telephone with history.
Exactly. But we need this. This is yes. critical in an increasingly information-driven age. We need to identify immediately when, no, the facts have changed. This is inaccurate. This needs to be shut down immediately. Right.
So if someone wants to train their own model on, they have their little pet project, something comes across their desk, they got a friend. It's like the new, I have an app idea. It's like, I have a model idea. Idea.
Yes.
So like, how do you like actually go about, mostly asking for myself, how do you go about doing this training? Obviously you're going to need some, massive GPU computation, something like that.
You don't. And here's a funny story. Right? The model right now that's wildly successful was trained on an Alienware Area 51M laptop with Ubuntu as an operating system.
So now, what, do you have like PyTorch and some other stuff on it or what?
Yes, it took 5 days.
Like it took 6 months. Oh, it took 5 days?
It took 5 days just running. I mean, I thought I was going to melt it, but It took 5 days to train the model. Once we got all the parameters set the way it was going to give us the best results. And you start small, so you start with a small data set. So from an image perspective, what we do is we architect the model, and we'll just run a quick training on like 2,000 images, and then run a test. Okay, how's it doing? Okay, let's expand it to 10,000. Okay, let's go to 20,000, 40,000. So we keep doubling the image count to see, if it's the data or the parameters. And then if the data doesn't, adversely impact it, but the model's still not performing, okay, we know it's the features. We need to adjust the features, batch size, if it's a VIT patch, epochs, number of epochs, learning rate, things like that.
So do you eventually have to like upgrade all that hardware to something more robust, to like something in the cloud
once
or
we
rent?
get to absolutely. So I think our current limitation locally is probably like 200,000 images, or a substantial data set size. But once we get the model working with that data set size, then we know we can push it up to either AWS or GCP, whichever one we happen to be using for that specific project, and then explode the data set
But you
out
can
to.
start on a laptop. That is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. A funny story. They used to be able. There was. I don't know if it's still there, but so there used to be a Python library that you could download, an IDE, onto your Android device, and I've actually architected a very small model because I was traveling. So I'm like,
You're like on a plane
yeah,
training your model on a
architecting it. Yeah,
Galaxy S something.
right. Right. It was the first Galaxy Note version. Actually, is what I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if you have any ideas, it's relatively easy. I would say be careful, because I know the thing now is vibe coding. Be very careful with that, because you become beholden to that provider, right? Be very careful. So if you use Lovable, which is great, you could use Gemini.
Replit.
Replit agents are really good. Firebase, that's the one. Firebase Studio. They're all really good in their own way, but you have to be very careful, because once you check that box and put your credit card in there and you start getting really creative, be careful, because those costs are going to spin up really quick. And I'm sure yourself, one misconfigured server that can run up your bill really fast before you even know it.
Yeah, I think it was GPT working on some Ansible scripting for me to spin up some home lab stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got some experience with Ansible, and I was looking through it and I was like, why are you doing that? Like, that's not good. Then I asked it and it goes, oh, absolutely. You're 100% correct. I'm like, God, why did I even start this? Like,
Right.
you just have to be careful.
Yeah, as an advisor, as a co-pilot, as a coding assistant, I think you're okay if you know what you're doing. But then again, you know what you're doing, and so this is kind of my like warning to like a lot of companies or whatever. It's the worst thing you could do is get rid of the people that actually know what they're doing and think you can replace them with a junior dev with a co-pilot. Because I was speaking to a gentleman a couple of days ago, actually, on the flight, and he was a chemical engineer for petroleum. And he was asking me, like, our company wants to deploy all these, AI assistants for, junior engineers and this and that. That's the most dangerous thing on the planet. They should not be doing that. And he was like, really? Here's why. Just like with understanding Ansible and how it should work and things like that. So there's a thing about experience called wisdom that I think is getting lost right now. It's not knowing what to do, it's knowing why you don't do certain things. And like I was telling him, so you understand all the chemicals, all the flash points and all of that stuff, right? A junior engineer may not know that, and they may program that, or they may ask that agent or assistant, I need something with a flash point of X that burns super clean with X. That's the goal. They didn't put in any of the safety criteria or the constraints that to work within that system. And they come to your lab and they've just created one of the most combustible, chemicals that man has ever known. And they're like, watch this. And they take the top off them because the oxygen hit it. You level a city block, right? And it's not that they didn't know what they were doing. They just didn't know what not to do.
Exactly.
And so that's where I think, this whole push to replace certain people or certain groups of people with AI will be disastrous, because experts aren't experts for what they know. It's the wisdom that's in that. knowledge that continues and continues to get discounted.
So that was really good advice. But that was actually my last question is, do you have any advice for like AI founders? They could be building models. They could be building apps with AI. Like it, which is what you just said about wisdom. Is that about what you would say, or you got something else?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about digging into systems that the smartest of humans don't understand how they work. Like they can tell you the mechanics, but there's not a single human being on this planet that can tell you how exactly that model came to that prediction. So you have to be very careful when you're building these solutions to surround yourself with the right people that understand not just all of the good, but all of the bad. Like with Falcon's AI, I am, and I think you have to be this with this new technology. I consider myself as probably the chief paranoia officer. Like if I had a true title, it would be like CPO. Like I'm paranoid about everything, not to the debilitating,
Right.
level, but just to I'm aware of the way the future can be impacted adversely. It could be great, and we can do so many great things. And I honestly believe that people are great in general. But just like with people, you have a couple out there that can do some really bad things really quick. And so that's kind of the MO. Like, I'm not going to tell anybody not to chase the money. I'm not, that naive, but just be very careful, of what you're deploying into the world, because it can be used against you. And so you better be willing to accept that responsibility. And I've said this, from the get-go. So my thing to founders is be accountable. At the end of the day, be accountable. If it's yours, if you did it, you oversaw it and you built it and you deployed it into the public and something bad happened, step up, show your face, and take accountability for the damage that was caused. Because I promise you, they have no problem taking credit for the good. But just be grown-ups and take accountability for what you do. Take all the accolades, get all the funding, all the money. Woohoo, good job, great. That's all well and good. But you need to be accountable for any possible harms that come from the solutions that you deploy.
I think accountability is like the scariest word in our
Oh,
world
oh,
right now. No one wants accountability. They're
you
just
want
trying.
you want to lose friends and business deals? Throw that word out there. Yeah,
The most
accountability is a
dangerous
rough one.
word in the human
It's
language.
a rough one. But if there's anything that we can do to help you, I'd like to spitball some stuff. Like I said, I've been working in the background ever since I was looking at DNS filtering and what you have going on, and the kind of future threats. If there's something that you want to just jump on and have like another conversation, we don't have to be a podcast or anything. I love to get your perspective. I value other people's opinions and perspective. It's how we got here, to the state of technology that we got. Diverse perspectives, diverse opinions. You see stuff every day that I have no idea exist, and the same. So if we can kind of share that knowledge and come up with something that makes both of our lives better, or our companies or our technologies better, it's a win-win. I love doing stuff like this.
Awesome. Well, Michael and I are going to go talk backstage. Where can the people find you on the internet? Where's your favorite
So
place to chat?
favorite place is LinkedIn, and we're our website, falcons.ai. Go look us up on Hugging Face. Check out our YouTube page. That's another word. Easy to find, falcons.ai.